I'm sorry.
No green today, right? No green, yeah.
Greetings, everybody. We are about to start. I just got a phone call. Somebody said they're waiting on you. So greetings and welcome to St. Mark. It is an absolute honor to have you here today on this day, on this special and unique day. So thank you for being with us. And I am going to open us with prayer. I'm going to open us with prayer and then ask our dear friends from Hayti Reborn, particularly Miss Anita Neville, to come to the mic and take over from there. So let us bow for prayer. Good and gracious God, on this day, as we celebrate the life and lament the untimely death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and as it is a constant reminder that we live in struggle, we invoke your holy presence. We call on you, O God, because we still need you. We need you to come as close as we can stand. We still need you just as much now as we needed you before. We need you because the fight for freedom is an ongoing fight. We even beg your presence, dear God, because our longing for liberation remains an unquenched fire in our bones. We beg for your presence because we still have mountains to climb and we still have some dark valleys to get through. And while we thank you for the victories, yet we are constantly reminded that there's more work to do. So come now, in this day that we live and at this time, at this event, in this situation, to help us somehow learn what it means and what it looks like to be a beloved community. Teach us that the word community is more than a catchphrase or a marketing tool. but it's a heavenly idea that speaks to care and love for all things and for all people, as all things and all people belong to you. Help us to see that speaking of community is to pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So come now, Holy Spirit. Guide us, O thou great Jehovah. We are pilgrims in a barren land. We are weak, but thou art mighty. Hold us with thy powerful hand. Nourish our imagination, strengthen and guide our feet for virtuous living. In other words, bread of heaven, feed us until we want no more. In remembrance of Reverend Dr. King, and in the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Miss Anita.
Thank you, Reverend Pridgen. Greetings, Durham. My name is Anita Scott Neville, and I am the servant leader of Hayti Reborn. Hayti Reborn's sole mission is to provide advocacy and community engagement that promotes the preservation and restoration of the fertile and hallowed grounds known as Hayti. Grounds kept hallowed by monuments like this 135-year-old St. Mark AME Zion Church, and by the memories of community members of times when Hayti was a vital, economic, and thriving community in Durham. In these days, Hayti's fertility is seen and sought by so-called developers from near and far away, but for the purposes that exploit its fertility, with the result of erasing our monuments, but not our memories, our streets and spaces, but not our spirit. We are here today to inform and to advocate for the preservation of Hayti and to say no to the proposed rezoning that threatens its preservation. In 1968, on this commemorative date, April 4th, the voice of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was silenced, and we were left with the leadership of his legacy. Life in America changed for all. We chose this day to walk in the legacy of Dr. King and to follow in the echo of his guidance. During one of his last speeches here in Durham, Dr. King encouraged us to stay awake to defending our civil rights and preserving our community. We thank you all for heeding the call to stay woke. That's what you heard from us. We wanted you to stay woke to the efforts to restore Hayti and to preserve its legacy for all people. But more than that, thank you for being true to the humanity of protecting and promoting a diverse community where equitable practices for serving its citizens are promoted, because the spirit and demonstration of inclusion are recognized as the only way to rebuild, restore, and to revive all that is good in Durham. Today, however, we are here to focus on Hayti and the call to action to protect and preserve its legacy. Why? Because as early as 1912, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois saw and promoted our way of sustaining life and directed others to emulate our model of success. Later, Martin Luther King Jr. included our community and its leaders in his head and heart space for civil rights actions in the 60s. And also because today, each of you have found this plight, indeed this fight, worthy of your citizenship and attention. Today, you will hear from several others about why the ties that bind us are blessed, and be affirmed of the need for you to continue to strengthen those ties with your advocacy and your vote. Of course, it is understood and accepted that just because you're here does not necessarily mean that you are decided about the issue of rezoning in Hayti, but for certain, St. Mark African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church and Hayti Reborn have taken a stand to stay up and to step up for all that is good for our community, and that does not include rezoning. So, Durham, for the next hour, stay woke. Some of you will learn, and others will be reminded of the legacy of Hayti and why it is important to preserve and to restore it. For today, that means saying no to rezoning. Stay woke, brothers and sisters. Stay woke. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our songbird for the evening, Constance Prince, and her accompanist, Will Ellis Little. Constance Prince is a Durham native and was educated in Durham Public Schools. She attended NCCU in the Performing Arts Department and also Duke Divinity School, having earned a Master's of Divinity degree. She has raised 3 wonderful children in Durham and is now retired. Constance shares that she continues her life in preaching when called and by performing locally and in the region and by supporting her community. Will Ellis is a native of Anson County, but has been a longtime resident of Durham. He too is a graduate of NCCU in the Public Administration Department and is a talented musician who plays for churches and local artists. Will was a finalist for the International Blues Society competition in Memphis in January of this year. Let's welcome them.
How I got over. Tell me how I made it over, Lord. Well, you know my soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. You can clap your hands. Tell me how I made it over, Lord, Lord, Lord. Falling and rising all these years. You know my soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. Well, just as soon as I see Jesus, you know the man who died for me. You know the one who bled and suffered. You know he hung on Calvary. Well, I want to thank him because he kept me. I want to thank him, he never left me. Oh, I want to thank him for how he kept me. Lord, I want to thank him because he never left me. I want to thank God for giving me a vision. I want to thank God for old-time religion. Well, I want to thank him for being so good to me. Tell me how I made it over, Lord, Lord, Lord. Falling and rising all these years. You know my soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. Well, tell me how I made it over. How I made it over, Lord. You know my soul. Look back and wonder I made it over. I'm gonna wear a diadem in that New Jerusalem. I'm gonna walk these old streets of gold as in the homeland of his soul. And I am gonna view the host in white. You know he traveled both day and night. Well, coming on up from every nation. We're on our way to the great north, south, east, and west. We're on our way to a land of rest. I'm gonna join the heavenly choir. I'm gonna sing, never get tired. And then I'm gonna sing somewhere I'm gonna, you know I'm gonna shout, oh, my trouble's over. You know I wanna thank him. Thank him being so good to me. Yeah. Tell me how I made it over. How I made it over. You know my soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. Tell me how I made it over. Lord, Lord. Falling and rising all these years. You know my soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. I want to thank him. Thank you, Jesus. I want to thank God. Thank you, Jesus. I want to thank him. Thank you, Lord. I want to thank God. Thank you, Jesus. You know I rose early this morning. You know I rose early this morning. I rose early this morning. You know I rose early this morning. And God said, touch her in my name. God said, touch her in my name. And then I rose this morning. I rose this morning. I rose this morning. I rose this morning. I feel like shouting. Hey, yeah. I feel like shouting. Oh, yeah. I feel like shouting. Yeah. I feel like shouting. Oh, yeah. You know I want to thank him. Thank him. Thank him. Yeah. Tell me how I made it over, Lord, Lord. Crying all the years. You know my soul. My soul. Look back and wonder how I made it over. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. How I made it over. Durham, we'll get over. We will get over. We will get over. And I thank God for being so good to me. Hallelujah.
Are we woke, Durham? Hey, Ty, how we got over?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Constance.
Yes, ma'am.
Our next speaker for today is Terrance White. Terrance is a physicist and a biomedical engineer from Durham, North Carolina, whose academic journey took him through Morehouse College and Duke University. Since high school, he's been guided by his personal mantra, "I will be the great navigator," a declaration of his unwavering commitment to leading others toward new frontiers. With a passion for continuous growth and community empowerment, Terrance is dedicated to uplifting individuals by fostering knowledge, truth, and innovation. His relentless pursuit of economic and social progress is reflected in his leadership roles of Economic Vice Chair of the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People, Treasurer of Uplift Project Incorporated, co-founder of Precision Research and Development Solutions, and board member of Bro Capital. Through these roles, he actively drives entrepreneurship, economic development, and generational wealth building initiatives. Terrance is currently pursuing a professional master's in manufacturing leadership at the Georgia Institute of Technology, a step that aligns with his mission to advance biologics, manufacturing, and supply chain innovation. His work at United Therapeutics and Precision Develops focuses on pioneering medicines for life, ensuring that cutting-edge healthcare solutions remain accessible and impactful. Guided by empathy and discipline, Terrance remains steadfast in his mission to revolutionize healthcare, empower communities, and shape a future driven by data-driven solutions and collaborative leadership. Terrance White.
Thank you for that great introduction, Miss Anita. I'm happy to be standing here in front of y'all in the church I was actually born into. Actually, this was also the church that I married my wonderful wife, and we started our family together here. So it's happy to be in the house of the Lord. I want to start off by saying good afternoon, everybody. As we gather in unity in the house of the Lord, I'm deeply grateful to stand before you as a representative of a giant pillar, one that has long served as an advocate and protector of the Durham community. My name is Terrance White, and I have the honor of serving as your vice chair of the Economic Committee for the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People. Today, I stand as a continuation of many giants who've come before me, ensuring the fight for empowerment and equality in Black Durham's community endures. We ask for your help in carrying forward this legacy to protect, inform, lead, and empower our people in our community. We must protect our neighborhoods from the aggressive takeover of land and development. We must inform our community of equitable and civil rights as we engage in economic development. We must lead each other towards community agreements that uplift and benefit us all. We must empower one another with knowledge and transparency about what is truly happening around us. I hear you, son. With this mission in mind, the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People stand firmly in support of St. Mark and the Hayti community, ensuring that no rezoning efforts move forward if they are detrimental to the needs of the community. Together, we will continue to fight this fight. Together, we will build, and together we will protect our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrance, for persevering. Our next speaker is Allan Freyer. Allan Freyer is the president of the People's Alliance Board of Directors and a longtime Durham resident. He has a multi-decade career as a policy entrepreneur at the federal, state, and local levels. He is currently the president and founder of Pridgen Strategies, a Durham-based strategic research and communications consulting firm that focuses on helping clients achieve public policy change and just economies. His firm works with advocacy organizations, think tanks, and philanthropic foundations in North Carolina and all over the country. Before launching Pridgen Strategies in 2020, Allan led advocacy campaigns and policy research as Director of Workers' Rights at the North Carolina Justice Center for almost 10 years. His leadership and work with diverse coalitions helped to secure policy wins that raised wages and provided paid parental leave for public workers in Durham, raised reimbursement rates and wages for home health care workers across North Carolina, and ensured Durham's economic development and corporate subsidy policies yield concrete benefits for local residents. Allan also served on Capitol Hill as a policy advisor to 3 members of Congress, including work staffing the House Budget Committee. His work, alongside an unlikely coalition in the 2003 federal appropriations process, saved federal funding for HBCU land grant colleges like North Carolina A&T. Allan has earned a master's and a PhD in city and regional planning from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where he worked for many years as a consultant with the School of Government, providing economic development technical assistance to economically distressed communities across North Carolina. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and history from Duke University, where he currently serves on the faculty of the Sanford School of Public Policy. Allan lives in East Durham with his wife and son. Allan?
Thank you, Miss Anita. My name is Allan Freyer. I am the president of the Durham People's Alliance, and I'm very, very thankful to stand in this holy place tonight with y'all. And I'm grateful to stand in solidarity with our friends in the committee, St. Mark, and all of y'all as we fight a development that is not good for the Hayti community. And we all are united in saying no to the rezone. No to the rezone. So here's why I think we should say no to the rezone. Now, I've been looking at this. I'm a numbers guy. I know numbers can be boring, but these are infuriating. This project, so this developer came all the way from Chicago to build a building that they say is going to be just as tall as one city center. 300,000 square feet in the first phase. In phase 2, 1 million square feet. You want to know how many square feet are supposed to be set aside for Hayti businesses? 2,500. Now that's less than 1%. That's not an offer. That's a really, that's an insult is what that is. So even worse, no jobs or apprenticeships or even training programs set aside for Hayti residents. Do you know what they did say that they would give? This is what I have learned, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it and read it. Apparently a few trees and park benches. Well, then I heard about their so-called community engagement process, and then I wasn't surprised. Now, as this is my understanding, as I heard it, these developers from Chicago hired someone from Raleigh to come to Durham to ask folks in Hayti what they want. Why didn't they just ask folks from Hayti to ask folks from Hayti what we want? Wouldn't that make more sense? Look, development, in Durham, look, we have development all over Durham, right? Development doesn't have to be bad. It is an important way to promote prosperity, but it needs to benefit the actual people who live here, who live in Hayti. It needs to keep people in the neighborhood, not displace them. It needs to protect the cultural and social fabric of the folks who have lived here so long, and we know this project does the opposite. So this building does the opposite. Now, the good news is that we can stop this together. This Chicago developer needs the first stop is they need the Planning Commission to say yes. Then they need the City Council to say yes to rezone. Now we still have a democracy in Durham. I mean, I know it's not perfect, but it's better than what we got going on in Washington right now, right? It's imperfect, but our local democracy gives us this chance for our voices to be heard on Heritage Square. And I want the Planning Commission and the City Council to hear those voices now. So, no to the rezone. No to the rezone. No to the rezone. Can you hear us now? Thank you.
Everybody awake? All right. Our next 2 speakers have a lot in common. Both have extensive, documented, and decorated records of service to North Carolina. Both are attorneys who received their law degrees in Durham. Both are described as champions of justice. Both have served as North Carolina senators and are recognized for their legislative victories. And for today, what's most notable is that they both experienced a personal relationship with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Today, they will share some highlights and memories of their time with Dr. King. These two icons of service to Durham in particular are Senator Henry M. Michaux, Jr., who we all know as Micky, and Senator Floyd Bixler McKissick, Jr. Micky, if we could hear from you first.
Thank you, Anita, for that introduction. As I look out over the audience, I cannot help but reflect on many years ago in this same sanctuary. The only other time I was near the pulpit, I was sitting somewhere along in that area in the choir loft. My friend, Martin King Jr. was sitting in the seat behind me. And he came to speak to a packed church that had speakers on the outside to a crowd. Martin and I got to be friends, I think, about 1956 when I invited him to Durham. Now, I was chair of the Trade Week program for the Durham Business and Professional chain. And I went to Lewis Austin, who edited and the publisher of the Carolina Times, and said, Mr. Austin, I said, since I'm in charge of the program for Trade Week, I think our closeout rally, we ought to invite Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Durham to speak. And Austin looked at me and said, Micky, that's a good idea. Let's go to your office right now and call him. Well, we went to my office and we called the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. And fortunately, the secretary to Martin at that time was the mother of a friend of mine. And she and I talked for a few minutes. I said, well, we want to talk with Dr. King, if you will. She said, well, he's not here right now. She said, but stay where you are for the next hour. Within the next hour, Martin called, and we talked about coming. I said, well, Martin, you know I knew your brother, A.D. We were in boarding school together. He said, Micky, you ain't saying too much to me at this point. I said, but we have a lot in common. You come from Atlanta, even though you're in Montgomery. You come from Atlanta. Atlanta and Durham have a sibling rivalry. You've got Atlanta Life. We've got North Carolina Mutual. You've got the bank. We have a bank. You got savings and loan. We have savings and loan. He said, well, you know, I think I have always wanted to come to Durham to see that relationship between Durham and Atlanta. I'll be there. And that night, he did come for that meeting. Now, I got blessed out for inviting a preacher to a business rally. And I'll never forget, they called me in, but the man who saved my life once the first time was that man's father, Floyd McKissick Sr. Said, y'all leave Micky alone, he's gonna be all right. Martin came that night and spoke at that rally, and I have never had so much adulation expressed to me as I did for bringing Martin Luther King to Durham, North Carolina for the first time. Fine. One other remembrance I can really talk about is right here in St. Mark AME Zion Church. The closest that I have been to this pulpit was right back there. Martin sat right there. But I was charged with the fact that Martin had to catch a flight out of Durham that night at 10 o'clock. So Martin kept saying, Micky, I got to get home, I got to get home, I got to get home. I said, fine, Martin, we'll make sure you do that. Reverend Speaks was the pastor of the church at the time. And I told Reverend Speaks, I said, Reverend Speaks, whatever you do, don't stay there long. We've got to be on a flight at 10 o'clock tonight. Reverend Speaks said, we'll try to push it as fast as we can, but if you have to leave, you have to leave. The church was packed. There were speakers on the outside for the crowd outside to hear Martin Luther King Jr. We came into church. Like I said, Martin sat in that seat there. I sat a little bit behind him. And after about 15 minutes, Martin summoned me. He said, whispered in my ear, he said, we're not going to make that flight tonight. He said, well, I got something to say to these folks, and I'm going to say it. He said, go make changes, tell your mother to turn the bed down, and you get me a flight out of here the first thing in the morning. I said, fine. So I didn't hear the speech he gave that night, but he knew that he had something coming on because of the crowd that was around him. I spent the night calling, trying to get him a flight out the next morning, which I did. And finally, when he got through speaking and we were going back to the house, I said, Martin, what'd you talk about? He said, I don't know, Micky. He said, but whatever it was, he said, it sure woke the people up. And it's appropriate that today, we are talking about being woke. But those are the things. I can remember, and you don't want me to tell you that Martin and I became close friends long before that. We became close friends in 1956 when we first invited him here. But one of the things that we talked about was how people affect you. We were sitting talking one night. He said, there were times when my pacifism, when my peaceful thinking turned around. He said, in Montgomery one night, we were at a meeting, and somebody came in and told me that the parsonage where my wife and my firstborn were living had been bombed. And of course, I left the meeting and went initially to the parsonage and got inside. Coretta and Yoki were fine. He said, but something hit me at that time. He said, I ran to the front door, pulled out the shotgun from behind the front door, pardon me, and opened up the door. And here was this humongous crowd of black folks with every kind of weapon that you could think of, making sure that I was all right. He said, then I put the shotgun back behind the door, closed the door, prayed, then opened the door and went back out and calmed the crowd down. Well, I said, fine. I said, but Martin, as a peaceful person, what were you doing with the shotgun in the house in the first place? Martin looked at me, he said, Micky, the shotgun came with the house. Now, it's like he tried to get me to do things, to march with him. And I'll never forget the Selma March. Martin and I talked, and I said, well, when the judge gives you the order that you all can march on Selma, I'll join you. I said, but until then, Martin, you know better than ask me about these things. Finally, he said, well, I know that, but I didn't go the first night of Selma. He finally got the order. I joined the march in Selma the night before they marched to the Capitol, in order where he gave his speech about the sword of justice reaching down at that point. But one other little vignette here. There's so many stories between us that it's just hard to really put them all together. I'm in the process now. My wife, who sits there, is helping me put this stuff together. But I guess there are many other vignettes I have. But here in Durham, Martin came back any number of times. There were times he came to Durham, folks didn't even know he was here. But we talked, and I guess there are many other stories I could tell you about what we talked about. For instance, let me give you one more. Martin always wanted me to be a politician. I said, Martin, you out of your ever-loving mind. I will never, ever become a politician. Finally, in 1964, the year that I finished law school, Maynard Jackson, who became the first black mayor of Atlanta, was my law school classmate. And Maynard and I got to be friends, and basically we knew Martin well. So finally one day I said to Maynard, Maynard, I think I'm going to do what Martin has been asking me to do for a long time. I'm going to get involved in politics. Maynard grabbed me by the arm. I said, what are you doing? He said, we're going to your house right now, and you're going to call Martin and tell him what you're going to do. So we got to the house. We called the office. Ms. Proctor was there. Said, got Martin on the phone. Said, Martin, I'm going to do what you've been asking me to do for all of these years. I'm going to get involved in politics. And you could hear this deafening silence coming over the phone. Finally, this voice boomed out and said, well, it's about damn time you decided to do something I asked you to do. And from that point on, in 1964, I got involved politically until 1968. This day in 1968, I made up my mind that I would never ever become involved in politics, because the idol that I had, the friend that I had been killed because of politics at that time, I thought. And so in 1968, I gave up any idea of becoming politically involved. In 1972, Durham picked up an extra seat in the North Carolina House. And some folks came to me and said, you know, it's time for you to run. I said, well, I'm not doing it. I said, I've seen what it has done to my close friend. I've seen what it has done to others. I'm not going to become involved in politics anymore. Then that night, I don't know what happened, but I said, I cannot back off of my commitment to Martin Luther King Jr. And I came back to the folks the next day and said, I will go and run for the seat. You all gonna have to pay for it. But I will run for that seat in 1972. I did it because of the commitment that I had made to Martin at the time we became close friends. And believe it or not, in 1972, I ran and won. And 20 times thereafter, I ran and won that seat. But it was because of what Martin had instilled in me. The same feeling that he had the night he thought that Yoki and Coretta were a problem, I think that same thing hit me. I said, I cannot go against my word to my friend, to my mentor. And so for 20 times, y'all sent me back to Raleigh to represent. That was 40 years of my life I spent representing you in Durham because of one man, Martin Luther King Jr. For whatever contribution, that's Martin's fault. You found fault with me, that's Martin's fault. It wasn't mine, it was his, because I had to live up to what the promises that I had made to him. Let me close with two things. The first is something that Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote. A crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double. Life, black life. Being black in this country at that time meant being a part of the battered, the bruised, the scarred, and the defeated. But if you look at the piano keyboard, you will see the black and white keys. When they are played together, they play every emotion that you can always feel. Those black and white keys played together. Finally, I used to go to New York every now and then, see stage plays. And I went to see a play called Pearly Victorious. And the thing that struck me was Pearly's prayer at the black church, his benediction at the black church had for the white boss's funeral. Pearly said this: "Today I find in being black a thing of beauty, a joy, a secret cup of gladness, a native land in every time or place, a native land in every black person's face. Be loyal to yourself, your hair, your lips, your laughing speech, your loving kindness. A black person's kingdom vast as any other. Accept and full the sweetness of your blackness, not wishing to be white, no red, no yellow, nor any other race or face but this. Farewell, my deep and Africanic brothers and sisters. Be brave. Keep freedom in the family and do what you can for the white folks. And now, may the Constitution of the United States go with you, the Declaration of Independence stand by you, and the Bill of Rights protect you. And may your own dreams be your only boundaries, henceforth, now, and forever."
Well, that's a very tough act to follow. But my fate in life is to always follow tough acts. So notwithstanding that fact, let me first thank Reverend Pridgen for opening up the doors to this sanctuary this evening. The doors here at St. Mark's have always been open to those in the civil rights movement. I think back to the 60s. You think about St. Joseph's, you think about White Rock, you think about Union Baptist, you think about Mount Vernon, and you think about St. Mark's, because those were the churches in Durham where the ministers were open-minded. Those were the churches in Durham that pulled people together. Those are the churches in Durham where you could find people who would put their walk and their talk on the line for the civil rights movement. That's where people came from. And the campus of NCCU, that was a youth movement. That was a movement that stirred up folks. It wasn't necessarily the folks working in North Carolina Mutual and the folks working downtown at Mechanics and Farmers and Mutual Savings and Loans that were out there on the streets picketing each and every week. It was the young people from North Carolina Central, from that campus that would mobilize, that were awakened by the mood of the era and of that time to bring about change, because they were defiant and they would not accept institutional racism. They would not accept the status quo. They would not accept the fact that America could call them second-class citizens. They were defiant, and they went out and worked, and they turned the city of Durham around, the state of North Carolina around, and the United States of America around. And that's what it's about. And my father was a part of that effort. He was a part of that movement. Some of you old enough will perhaps remember him. Others will not, because that day and that time and that era has faded in the lives of many. I think there's some photographs that are circulating that are on the screen, which would depict my father working with Dr. Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael of SNCC, as well as others, Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, Whitney Young, Malcolm X is depicted in some of those as well. I see the late Congressman Adam Clayton Powell. He was in the forefront. I see that picture there was on the day after King was assassinated. My father spoke to an audience in the heart of Manhattan in the Garment District, where there were literally over 100,000 people assembled. So my father was among those. You see that picture right there? That would have been a picture where he and Dr. King were working together, leading the March on Washington on August 28th of 1963. And among those 10 leaders that met with President Kennedy at the White House that day, the very day that Dr. King gave and delivered that famous speech that we have recorded in our memories, I have a dream. I have a dream. And yes, a cover of Newsweek magazine there where you would see my father and Dr. King, Whitney Young, Stokely Carmichael, Roy Wilkins. So when I say I had a front row seat to history, it was literally a front row seat. It was a chance to know all of those leaders. That picture right there was in Memphis, Tennessee, the city where King was ultimately assassinated. You'll see my father in the forefront, Dr. King seated next to him, and Stokely Carmichael there. My father announced that they would continue the Meredith March. You say, what was the Meredith March? James Meredith was the first black who integrated the United States of Mississippi. The University of Mississippi. I misspoke. And of course, he announced that he would go out there and march against and march across the state of Mississippi. My father had been the first African-American to integrate a public university in this state in 1951 when he integrated the law school at UNC Chapel Hill. He and Meredith were close. And of course, when Meredith embarked upon that march, he did not know that the first day in, a sniper would come along and shoot him. He did not die that day. But my father and Dr. King, Stokely came together and announced they would continue that march. I went down for that march, and we all stayed at that Lorraine motel where Dr. King was killed and assassinated roughly a year and a half earlier. And you're talking about security during that period? The way we got from Memphis to Mississippi each day was with the Deacons of the Fence, a group that was organized that provided us with protection. And how did they do that? There'd be 3 cars. One in front of us, one behind us, and we would be in the middle. And all the civil rights leaders were separated. I would ride typically with my father. They had shotguns, they had rifles, and they had CB radios. That's how you got to where you needed to go. And here in Durham during that period, if you went to our home on Roxborough Street, there were so many threats about bumming, about doing whatever might be necessary. Letters came in the mail from the Ku Klux Klan on their stationery that there were people sitting on our front porch every night for probably the better part of 2.5 or 3 years from dusk dark to the break of dawn to provide protection. And yes, on that tragic day, 57 years ago, at that point, my family lived in New York, in Harlem, at a brownstone townhouse in that time frame. And the calls came. The news flash and a bulletin came across the TV screen. Dr. King had been shot. He had been shot on the balcony of that Lorraine motel. And yes, that day, it reverberated all across the United States of America and all across the world. And the phone calls started coming. Our home was turned into a media center and a circus. NBC, ABC, CBS, every TV station, radio station imaginable coming and descending to hear what my father had to say as a friend, as a confidant, as a civil rights leader who worked with Dr. King over those many, many years, fighting together for civil rights all across America and all across the South. And yes, one thing that occurred was a sense of grief all across America. White House call that night, reaching out to my dad, plead to people you know, plead publicly to make certain we keep America calm. But America wasn't gonna be calm because Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And Harlem burned that night and continued to burn for 5 more nights. Watts burned that night and continued to burn for nights at a time. Our nation's capital, right there around Howard University, rioting all across, devastated urban ghettos in America where black people were living at that time. And they did it because of the fever and the feverish pitch, the fact that Dr. King symbolized the American Civil Rights Movement. He symbolized the fact that we were tearing down barriers. He symbolized the fact that we were finally making progress. We finally saw the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed that got rid of all the segregated lunch counters and the restrooms and the like, hotels and motels. We saw the Voting Rights Act passed that got rid of literacy tests and poll taxes. We had seen fair housing laws that were being discussed to get rid of discrimination in buying and selling of homes and real estate. But you know what? Blacks had not substantially gained from all of that legislation. And one thing my dad talked about and Stokely talked about was black power. And during that Meredith March down in Greenwood, Mississippi, Stokely Carmichael came to a podium and looked out to that audience where those people had been marching for hours all day long. And he said, what do we want? Black power. What do we want? Black power. What do we want? Black power. When do we want it? Now. It reverberated and it changed America. It changed the direction of the civil rights movement. We were no longer going to sit back and not identify as being black, to say that we were colored or to say that we were Negro. And James Brown led the effort with his song. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And you know what? America came together. America changed. We as black people were proud. We were proud of our roots with Africa. We weren't afraid of those connections anymore. We established relationships with those countries that were decolonizing, where they had black presidents. We were no longer ashamed of our roots. And today, what we must do, once again, is wake up. Because right now, it's not just the white folks out there that woke up for a couple of years and now want to go back to sleep. We got a whole lot of black folks and other folks out there that need to be woken up too. All right? and we think about the rhetoric we've heard in recent years, they want to get rid of what they call critical race theory. They don't even know what the term means. What they really want to do is get rid of black history. They want to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why in the world would we not all want to live in a society where there was diversity, equity, and inclusion? But yet we have a president today who not only wants to get with it in government programs and get rid of minority scholarships, he wants to go to the private sector and say, hey, you too have to stop this. Affirmative action in education. We've seen what happened with the United States Supreme Court. They've turned back the hands of time. We look at Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that required pre-screening of measures passed by state legislators in cities and towns when they change voting districts, stricken down by the United States Supreme Court. We've seen Roe v. Wade stricken down by the Supreme Court. If we do not see a need to wake up today and meet that challenge on the anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, then something's wrong with us. It's time for us to wake up. It's time for us to understand our roots. And as a part of understanding those roots, it's time to think about Hayti. What was Hayti? What did it represent to you and to me? What did it mean as a part of Durham's history and its legacy? What became of the Regal Theater? What became of Garrett Pharmacy, Turner Beauty Supply? All the stores and businesses that were along Pettigrew Street that people patronized. Or right here, you've seen Annie Mae Gilmore's alteration shop right across the way, doctor's office right up the street as well. But that part of Hayti is gone. That part of Hayti in our history has been forgotten, except for what exists within our hearts and our souls. But it's up to us to protect that legacy. It's up to us to pass that knowledge. It's up to us to pass on to the next generation that proverbial baton, to motivate them to mobilize, to motivate them to get out and work, to let them learn what's going on with redevelopment efforts in this very community that can impact their lives. But more importantly, what we need to do to fight for our rights in America, because if we don't fight, we will lose them. They will be eroded. And all that Dr. King worked for, my father worked for, it's Stokely Carmichael, Roy Wilkins, James Farmer, all that they did to put their lives and soul on the lines to make this a better America, to make this a place where people are judged, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character, those aspirational goals that we all embrace. It will be forgotten. And if we don't wake up this generation that's complacent and let them sit back and play video games and just sit there and listen to rap music, then it's on us. Because I want to pass on this legacy to my children and to my grandchildren and whoever may become and will be here when I'm long gone. Because you know what? That's our duty. That's our obligation. That is what we are charged with. So I ask you today, on this 57th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, to renew yourselves to that movement, to make certain that we go out there and we fight for the rights that we deserve, that we turn the hands of time forward, not backwards, that we make sure we get good people elected to office, that we are involved in this political process, and that when questions come up, whether it's a rezoning case, or whether it's about city council appropriations, or what's going on at the Board of Education, we didn't fight this long to get people into all the schools that they might want to attend to allow them to get a substandard education. We got to fight, and if we don't, we will lose. It's up to us individually and collectively, but I know on the anniversary of this very sacred occasion, you will stand with me as I stand with you, and we will fight. Thank you so very much.
Next, I will introduce to you L.A. Jones. L.A. is a lifelong justice advocate and a self-described systems disruptor. She's also the co-founder and executive director of operations for the Hayti Reborn justice movement. With roots in community organizing and a voice shaped by lived experience and liberation work, LA brings fire and clarity to the fight for equity. Tonight, LA will offer her original poem entitled Furious, a raw, urgent meditation on rage, resistance, and resilience. After we hear her poem, LA will introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Henry McCoy. And before Dr. McCoy stands up to speak, we will be graced by another song from Constance Prince. Let's welcome LA.
Boy, this is a tough group up here. I'm going to tell you a secret today, though it's forbidden, so I shouldn't share. I'm never to tell you what lies deep inside my soul. Is it something to bear? I'm not even sure of the reason, just simply endowed with the rule. It accompanies my skin and my gender, the main ingredient and the source of my fuel. It's used to dismantle the violence you spew. You see an angry black woman, but you don't have a clue, because I'm furious. Skip the anger, the pissed offness, I'm furious. In a meeting, I'm smiling and still furious. Yes, I'm laughing and joking and furious. Stop killing my family, it makes me furious. Oppression, the president, I'm furious. Russia, the market, and China, too many George Floyds are dead. No aspirin that's made can ease my heart, and acids cannot help my head. Now don't panic, because I see it all on your face. I'm not off the deep end, I'm still in the race. No need for recording, for I'll act with grace, but my mask has slipped off. So today in this place, I'm sharing my secret. Just don't tell the rest. Don't call the police or contact the press. I'm still an American, just under duress, with one minor detail that I must confess. I'm furious. Men are hanging, slow changes, I'm furious. No peaceful nature, I'm tired of acting, I'm furious. Humility escapes me, no answer from God. Is kindness for suckers? Just take off these bonds. Racism is rampant. My armor Allan. Outside is the enemy, my gut is a bomb. You think that you know me, but you're oh so wrong. Yes, I'm smart and I'm funny and I'll sing peaceful songs. Paternalism's insulting, no father in sight, raised by the goddess. So you have no right to govern my body, yet you plant your seed, then you don't want to help me when I am in need. Within me confusion, I turn on myself. My heart longs for peace, but I can't catch my breath. I can't shut down horror. My head spins around People are dying. The White House let us down, so I'm furious. My heart is broken, the smell of gunfire, and I'm furious. No, you don't get to hide because I'm furious. You're late for the show, but there's seats on the ride. I'm sick of the dancing. My feet are so tired. If you pay attention, just open your mind. You'll see the hypocrisy, and maybe you'll find that you're furious. Thank you. Good evening, Durham family. Tonight, we gather here on sacred ground, spiritually and historically. On this day, 57 years ago, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was taken from us, but his message still rings true today. And let's be clear, that message was and continues to be to stay woke. This isn't just a reflection today, it's a rally. We are here because developers are circling Hayti like vultures again. They want our land again. They want our story again. And they want our silence as always. But what they'll get tonight is our fire. Because we know that resistance is not just reaction, it's revelation. And leading us deeper into that truth is a man whose roots in justice run deep. Planted by a family that didn't just preach courage, they practiced it. Now, he's so young that he may not even know this story. Can't believe that he let me up here without looking at what I was going to say, but all right. Our grandmother, with quiet defiance, once walked into a corner store beside the market house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, downtown, and demanded to be served. Fearlessly standing her ground while others lingered outside, too afraid to enter. And when her daughter, our mother, asked, "Why would you go there knowing the trouble that it could cause?" Our grandmother said, "Because I ain't gonna let nobody take what's supposed to be mine." The fire runs through Henry's veins. And when he brought it to Durham in 1997, it met the flames of a city already in motion and sharpened his sense of justice into a force we now know and follow. Dr. Henry C. McCoy Jr. is a name that commands national respect. His soul was forged right here in Durham. Before the PhD, the policy papers, or the powerful podium, he was a little black boy growing up with me and our siblings in our grandmother's lean-to shack with a tin roof and holes in the floor, holes that let in the vermin and let out the heat. We had no running water, just an outhouse out back, and one of those tall TV antennas that you had outside the house that had to be turned by hand. Guess who usually got picked to turn the antenna? That's right, Henry, who was the youngest at the time. Those weren't just hard times, they were character building times. And they shaped a man who would one day build systems to uplift communities that looked just like the ones that raised us. We were each other's first teammates, challenging our two sisters between us in kickball and seeing who could run down the dirt road the fastest with no shoes on, because everyone knows you run faster with no shoes. We both played college sports later on, but our earliest games and our fiercest battles were fought in our mother's front yard. Henry went on to become a respected professor, entrepreneur, policy expert, and national speaker on economic justice, energy equity, and community policy. He's led billion-dollar initiatives, taught at the nation's top universities, and advised presidents, but not the current one. He made it very clear from the beginning that he does not work for those who do not support justice. Now, don't be fooled by the titles. What makes us most proud of Henry isn't the accolades, it's the ethic. He could have partnered with greedy capitalists and made millions. Instead, he focused on acquiring land to protect it in community land trusts, ensuring Black families don't just survive, they get to own. He's more interested in power redistribution than power accumulation. He believes that those who have been denied the most should have the greatest say in our future. And he still makes time for what matters most. He's a loving father, a loving husband, a present father to Jalen and Jamila, a loyal son, and a faithful brother. And when life knocks him down, and it has, he doesn't just get back up. He rises with a lesson, a plan, and a purpose. I will never forget the first day he showed me one of his thought diagrams not long after college. And he had everything lined out, and he showed it to me. Had it on a poster board and everything. He was proud. And I said, that's fantastic, but why are you telling me? He said, because I need to show somebody what I've been shown so they can hold me accountable. So tonight, Durham, we don't just welcome a keynote speaker. We welcome a warrior, a witness, a world changer who once scribbled a note to our mother saying, I'm going to grow up and change the world, and had our baby sister sign it as a witness. Spoiler alert, he meant every word. Please rise and join me in welcoming my brother, our champion, Dr. Henry C. McCoy, Jr.
Yeah. These songs are a reflection of our past and our current condition. Miss Roberta Flack. Trying times, that's what the world is talking about. You got confusion all over the land, yeah. Mother against daughter, father against son, the whole thing is getting out of hand. Well, for if there was more love for each other, but these are trying times. Well, you got the riots and the ghettos, and it's all around, yes it is. A whole lot of things that's wrong is going down, down, down. Now I just don't understand it, 'cause my point of view, I remember somebody said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and then folk wouldn't have to suffer. There was more love, but these are trying times. Sam Cooke. I was born by the river in a little tent, yeah. And just like that river, I've been running ever since. Said it's been a long time coming, and I know a change is gonna come. Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, it's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. I might not be if I knew I was up there beyond the sky. Said it's been a long time coming, and I know a change is gonna come. Yeah, yeah. Woo. Now I went, yes I did. I went to my brother, yeah, and I asked them, brothers, could you just help me, please? They said, good sister, I'd like to, but I'm not able. So when I looked around, I was right back down on my bended knee. Oh, there were times that I thought, yes I did. I thought that I wouldn't last for long. Can I get a witness? Hey, somehow, but right now, I believe I'm able. Yes, I am. I'm able to carry on. I said it's been a it's been an uphill journey all the way. Hey, and sometimes I've had to cry all night long. Yes, I have. Sometimes I just don't know right from wrong. Hey, it's been an uphill journey. Sure been a long way coming. Yes, it has. It's been real hard. Every step of the way. Yeah. Ooh. a change. Come on, Durham. A change. Yeah. A change is gonna come. Thank you.
Ooh, this is a hard act to follow. It's quite a group up here, and man, I know Reverend Pridgen didn't give me the permission to say this, but I think thanks to Ms. Prince, I think tonight can count as church for the week. So sleep in on Sunday. No. I want to thank everybody for your great words tonight, and I want to thank my big sister, my older sister, for those kind words. And every time I walk by one of those antennas you have to turn, I have some kind of flashback. So, but before I begin my remarks tonight, I want to really take a moment to thank all of you all for attending tonight. You could be anywhere else, and we appreciate you choosing to be here. We gather this evening for two important reasons. First, we gather to honor a true leader, a global leader, who has celebrated the world over nearly every day, in every language, in every culture. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot at approximately 7:01 p.m. Eastern Time on April 4th, 1968, a Thursday. That was 57 years ago. He was just 39 years old. The second reason that we are gathered here tonight is to discuss the 10 acres of lands that is fenced behind us, called Heritage Square. For some, it might just represent a relic of a bygone era, an abandoned shopping center whose best days are long behind, an eyesore. To others, they realize that the word heritage means something. Heritage is defined as property that is or may be inherited, something that is handed down from the past. It means an inheritance. The word heritage has weight. We're here to talk about promises made and promises broken. We're here to talk about what Dr. King referred to as promissory notes. But speaking of promises, I promise you that I'm not going to talk quite as long as Cory Booker tonight. But I do ask for some grace and some patience, for this is a very important conversation. I know that some of you know the history of Hayti well, while others do not. But everyone in this room can take a part in its future. I know that for some of you, the immediate future includes Ludacris, Lil Wayne, Keisha Cole, Erykah Badu, and J. Cole over in Raleigh at the Greenville Festival for the next couple of days. Where's my daughter at? But I'm fine with that. I'm going to call this message tonight, Stand Awake on the Way to Greenville. Just because King was dreaming doesn't mean that he was sleeping. King's public life began on a night much like tonight, 70 years ago. On a Friday night in 1955, assembling in a black church, the day after Rosa Parks was arrested for taking a stand and refusing to give up her seat on a bus. A group of committed leaders met and decided to stage a boycott. The Montgomery boycott was born. That boycott would launch the modern civil rights movement of the 20th century. On this Friday night, in this black church, what can we launch from Durham, North Carolina in the 21st century? King articulated the notion of the collective dream perhaps better than any other human in history. And even 6 decades after he shared it with us, his dream still resonates with us. However, his wasn't the first collective dream. For those whose ancestors have always been in this country, your ancestors had dreams of the future. For those here who have ancestors who came to this country of their own free will, your ancestors had dreams of the future. For those of us here who had ancestors who came to this country against their free will, our ancestors had dreams of the future. The black folks who settled this community that we meet in tonight, Hayti, whose heritage for 257 years prior to that had been enslavement, had dreams of the future too. After emancipation, this black community dreamed so much of freedom that it named itself after the first and only republic in the world to gain independence through a successful slave revolt. Hayti originally spelled its name Hayti. When the country changed the Y to an I in its spelling, Durham's Hayti truly became a one-of-a-kind community. Over the following century, the Hayti community endured and it survived, as other noted black wall streets across the country were systematically destroyed through racial violence, such as in Wilmington in 1898, and over 40 black communities nationally during the Red Summer of 1919. It was called Red because of all the bloodshed from black killings. And in 1921, when Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood District was bombed and burned to the ground. Hayti was the survivor. It became known as the capital of the black middle class, the city on the hill for blacks. It had more black wealth per capita than any other geography in the United States. And for much of the 20th century, it was home to the largest black-owned business in the world, North Carolina Mutual Insurance. Many black leaders throughout the 20th century visited Durham and stood in awe of the relative progress of the Hayti community. Famously, Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois visited Durham in subsequent years. Booker T. came in 1910, Du Bois in 1911. By this time, the two leaders could not agree on much of anything, but they did agree that Durham was the most incredible city they had ever seen for blacks. Du Bois captured it in his 1912 essay called The Upbuilding of Black Durham. Several generations later, Dr. King would start visiting Durham. Dr. King loved Durham. He loved coming to Durham. He had close friends in Durham, like the Michaux, the McKissicks, and his grad school classmate, Reverend Douglas Moore, who was the pastor who led the boycott of the Royal Ice Cream Parlor here in Durham in 1957, 3 years before the much better known Greensboro Woolworth sit-in. Dr. King traveled to Durham 5 times for official engagements from 1956 to 1964. Senator Michaux said he probably came a lot more than that, but I know of 5. This was significant because King was in such demand from his rise onto the scene as a national leader in December 1955, as the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, until his assassination 12 and a half years later in Memphis, Tennessee, marching for wages and rights of sanitation workers, that he rarely visited places multiple times unless he was engaged in active work there, such as protests and marches. Yet King did not travel to Durham to hold protests or marches. His first visit was on October 15, 1956, 2 months before the triumphant conclusion of the Montgomery bus boycott. He had been invited by the Durham Business and Professional Chain, an organization that still exists today, and is housed right across the street. Okay. He spoke at Hillside High School, which was also right across the street at the time. During that visit in 1956, he promised the Durham crowd that doors would open to you now that were never open in the past. Around this time, as King was visiting Durham for the first time and rising to the international acclaim after the Montgomery bus boycott and the victory, the public sector leadership of Durham was promising the Hayti community that many great doors of the future were waiting to open for them if they just agreed to a major economic development project. Promises were made. Trust us, and the Hayti community will be built back better than ever. Known as urban renewal, these same conversations were happening in black communities all across the United States. King returned to Durham for the second visit 4 years later in 1960, when he flew in on a cold Tuesday morning, February 16th, at the request of his friend, Reverend Moore. Though the attempted 1957 Royal Ice Cream Parlor sit-in had not caught on, nor similar attempts in Oklahoma and Kansas in 1957 and 58, when the Greensboro Four of North Carolina A&T did gain traction on February 1st, 1960, Reverend Moore did not pout about who should get credit for the first sit-in within North Carolina. He instead engaged and asked King to engage as well. Within a week of the Greensboro sit-in, similar activities had spread to Durham, to Winston-Salem, followed by places across North Carolina like Charlotte, Raleigh, Elizabeth City, and my hometown of Fayetteville, before reaching Virginia and spreading across the Southeast. Moore immediately asked King if he would come to Durham for a strategy session on how to expand the movement with sit-in representatives from across North Carolina. Durham would be where they met to plot their next moves. King agreed, and 2 weeks later, he was in Durham, surveying Durham's downtown lunch counters that had been involved in sit-ins and meeting with those leaders from across the state, many of them college students. Thus, King's first engagement with the sit-in movement was here in Durham. King told those gathered to remember that this fight was not about black versus white, but about justice versus injustice. He offered his philosophy of jail, not bail. He told the crowd that let us not fear going to jail if the officials threaten to arrest us for standing up for our rights. He said maybe it would take the willingness to stay in jail to arouse the dozing conscience of our nation. Remember that term, the dozing conscience of our nation. It'll prove relevant later in this message. King suggested to the gathered strategists that they tell the store owners that if the lunch counters were not open on an integrated basis, that the protesters would recommend that people of goodwill boycott the entire store. This was something he had learned in Montgomery during the boycott. It was not moral or legal arguments that won the day, but the economic loss of the city bus service that brought an end to the boycott. That same evening of February 16, he spoke to a standing room only crowd of more than 1,000 at Durham's White Rock Baptist Church. King told those in attendance that night that they stood at a crucial point in the freedom movement. He stated, at a certain point in every struggle of great importance, a moment of doubt or hesitation develops. He finished by saying, when you have found by the help of God a correct course, a morally sound objective, you do not equivocate, you do not retreat, you struggle to win a victory. He emphasized that the personal cost might be high, but one must resolve to bear it because the goal wasn't simply integration, but true personal freedom, because freedom is necessary for one's selfhood, for one's intrinsic worth. But any follower of King knows that he experienced incredible depression, as anyone would in his position with constant death threats and incredible pressures related to the movement. Yet it was widely reported that this 1960 visit to Durham renewed King's hope in the future of the movement. But King wasn't the only one in Durham who had hope in the future around 1960. Hayti was in possession of what it felt was a promissory note from the city leadership for a rich and prosperous future. In the following years, as King continued rising to greater national and international fame, Durham's plan for urban renewal was moving forward. The first parts of the freeway, originally named the East-West Expressway, opened in 1962. If you walk out these front doors and look up to the right, you will see that highway. We now call it the Durham Freeway. The Durham Freeway was constructed directly through the heart of Hayti. It is estimated by some that over 4,000 homes and 500 businesses in the Hayti community were destroyed to create that highway. So what about that promissory note? Well, the Build Back Better didn't actually quite work out so well. Hundreds, if not thousands, of families were displaced. Single-family homes were replaced with public housing, much of it on a site just a quarter mile up the street called Fayetteville Street Apartments, or Fayette Place. The businesses were located to a nearby area called Tin City, that is T-I-N, because of the metal buildings that were to house them temporarily. Most of those businesses did not survive. So much for generational wealth. So much for heritage and inheritance. What happened in Durham's Hayti in the 1960s is an embodiment of what happened all across America in the 1960s. Black erasure of history, of wealth, of property, of heritage. Urban renewal became known as urban removal. And everyone in Durham and Hayti knew that their promissory note had not been honored. That is why some 20 years later, in 1985, when Heritage Square Shopping Center was open, there was so much excitement. It wasn't what was lost, but it was something, a start. It looked like a promise of things to come. Heritage Square was the embodiment of collective dreaming. The shopping center was financed with money from private real estate companies, city loans, 23 individual investors, and a coalition of Black churches and community groups. But the timing was bad for all of Durham. Globalization was wreaking havoc on the city. Factories closed, jobs disappeared. Durham's economic foundation crumbled. And you know what they say? When the white community gets a cold, the Black community just hopes to live to see another day. The shopping center struggled. The collective dream that Heritage Square might launch a new era of prosperity in Hayti became, if not a dream lost, then perhaps a dream deferred. In the 40 years since it was built, the property has changed hands a number of times. And that brings us to this moment. The current owners of the property, based in Chicago, purchased the site in 2022 for $65 million with the dream of what they wanted to build on the site. Unfortunately, their dreams have not aligned well with most from the historic Hayti community. Many from the community asked for affordable housing. Developers said no, stating that the first three phases of the build-out would have 300 market-rate apartments where someone could rent a one-bedroom, 800-square-foot loft for a little more than $2,500 a month. Some from the community asked if there would be an opportunity to purchase equity in the project, similar to the first Heritage Square development, sharing the risks, but also having the potential for the upside. The developer said no. They said they already had their investors, which included a $50 billion private equity fund in Chicago. The community stated they wanted the site to offer some connection to opportunities for generational wealth for those historically connected to Hayti. The developer proposed a number of amenities that would serve their target tenants, claiming that they were being added to support historic Hayti, but not really. When asked again about the generational wealth, the developer offered to rent 2,500 square feet of retail space out of the 1 million total square foot for 50% of the cost. Most recently, the developer informed the community of a proposed name change from Heritage Square to Carolina Research Square. When asked why the name changed, the developer stated that their leasing and marketing offices in Chicago indicated that it would be better to create the appearance that the site was more proximate to Research Triangle Park than presumably to the Black community that it actually was, in order to secure an anchor tenant. They did offer to provide a marker, though, to represent the history of Hayti. I call it a tombstone. You were here, but now you are gone. You all remember that old pizza commercial? What do you want on your tombstone? Hayti. When the community has asked if the developer would consider delaying its rezoning request to enter into deep conversations with the community around a co-development vision of the site, the developer says no, and has suggested that they were doing the community a favor to even engage in the conversation when they didn't have to. But it's important to note that the primary reason the developer is now engaging in what they believe is a significant conversation with the community is because they made a mistake. They paid $65 million for a site without doing a full inspection on it. They had construction plans of building underground. The current zoning would allow that. However, in pre-construction, they learned that the site was more challenging than expected, and building underground would become too expensive. So now they are requesting rezoning to build higher up on the site. To put that into perspective, the site is already zoned to build a building that is as tall as North Carolina Mutual Life building. The developer would now like permission to build on the site up to a height of one city center, the tall 300-foot glass building in the heart of downtown Durham. Can you imagine buildings that height outside these doors? There's nothing else close to that scale on the entire corridor or anywhere nearby. Once again, a developer is coming and asking the Hayti community to pay the cost for them, to subsidize their dreams while discarding ours. Hayti has already taken on the characteristics of the ship of Theseus, also known as Theseus' paradox, which is a philosophical thought experiment that explores the nature of identity over time. It asks whether an object that has all of its components replaced remains fundamentally the same object. Is a ship that has had all of its boards entirely replaced one by one the same ship in the end? If every component of Hayti gets replaced one by one, will it still be Hayti? You tell me. To be clear, the community is not against development. It is not against the developer profiting from its acquisition. It legally purchased the site, so it has legal right to develop on it. What the community is against is being erased, overshadowed, and given a check that is going to bounce. Some of you young people don't even know what a bounce check is. Ask your parents. The community members who organized this event tonight are against the rezoning request under any condition. If the developers want to build, let them build based on their original intentions and current zoning. Less than a year ago, a new promissory note was presented to the Hayti community. In May 2024, with some fanfare, the Durham City Council launched the Hayti Promise Fayetteville Street Corridor Project, or Hayti Promise for short. Hayti Promise presents as its purpose to improve the social, cultural, and financial well-being of Durham's Fayetteville Street Corridor, stating that this area has faced long-term neglect and underinvestment. It says the goal is to create fair and inclusive growth for the Fayetteville Street Corridor and its nearby neighbors, and aims to boost economic vitality and local wealth creation in the historic area, combining efforts to address problems like wealth inequality, infrastructure issues, and the effects of COVID-19 on residents and businesses. It says, among other things, that the project will focus on creating real, positive changes for the community, including using community feedback to create a shared vision for the future, preserving cultural identity by maintaining historic sites, promoting affordable housing for both renters and homeowners, especially long-time residents, and supporting entrepreneurship and community involvement at North Carolina Central University. So we're asking for the Durham City Council to do nothing more than what they already promised the Hayti community less than a year ago. When this rezoning request comes before you for a vote, just keep your promise. A promise is a declaration or assurance that one will do a particular thing or that a particular thing will happen. Honor the Hayti promissory note of May 2024. But now I want to go back 60 years. I want to return to Dr. King and his visit to Durham. More specifically, I want to concentrate on his very last visit, which happened in 1964. And I want to go for a moment beyond Heritage Square to a broader context of the time for which we find ourselves. Actually, King made several visits to Durham in 1964, a monumental year for King, the year that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was signed and that he won the Nobel Peace Prize. A year after his seminal 1963 I Have a Dream speech in Washington, and a year before the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Just weeks before traveling to Oslo, Norway to receive his Nobel Peace Prize, King made his last ever official stop in Durham. Early on November 13, 1964, King spoke at Duke University's Page Auditorium. At Duke, he said, "Human progress comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God." However, that night at 8 p.m., Dr. King addressed an overflow crowd of some 5,000 people of all races in North Carolina Central University's McDougal Gymnasium, his final speech ever in Durham. The title of his talk at NCCU that night was "Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution." It was not the first time he had given that speech, which had been to the Morehouse College graduating class of 1959. It was also not the last. He would give a version of this same speech a few other times over the rest of his life, tweaking it each time, including his final delivery of the Remaining Awake speech on March 31st, 1968, at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. 4 days later, he would be assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. But 4 years before his untimely death, he gave a unique version of the speech to Durham. So what were the last 2 words that Dr. King told Durham, North Carolina on November 13, 1964? He said, "Remain awake." In his Remain Awake speech, King began by declaring that the most important fact of the Rip Van Winkle story, for those of us who remember this from our childhood, was not that he had slept for 2 decades, but that he had slept through a great revolution, specifically one that went from having a king to one that elected his first president of the United States. Perhaps an even more relevant observation in 2025, as some seem to advocate for a return to such a monarchy as when Rip Van Winkle went into his hibernation. This speech was filled with some of King's most famous quotes. He said that we must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. He said we are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. He said whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. He said, for some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I'm what I ought to be. He said that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. He said that the time is always right to do right. And he said, we shall overcome because the arc of a moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But his speech was more than just a series of sound bites. In his speech, King talked about the concept of time. In fact, he called it the myth of time, responding to the oft-argued sentiment by both enemies and allies of the civil rights movement that time itself would solve all of our racial and economic ills. King proclaimed, no, time is neutral and can be used either constructively or destructively. But he followed this with an apology by saying, and I'm sorry to say this morning that I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme righteous of our nation, the people on the wrong side have used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. Does that sound familiar? He said that without hard, tireless, and persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation, and in 2025, evidently social reversion. Mostly, King said over and over and over again that we must remain awake during the Great Revolution. It's not just historic lands we are fighting to maintain, it is historic rights. What King failed to mention in any of the texts under this title is that the prime decider of the revolution that Rip Van Winkle slept through was a war, the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War, also known as the American Revolutionary War or the American War of Independence, was an 8-year battle that took place from April 1775 to September 1783, and part of the broader American Revolution for freedom, especially white freedom. But I believe we can overlook this oversight by King. I believe if he had the opportunity to look at it once again, he might understand it differently. Sometimes revolution can only be achieved on the other side of a war. No, I'm not suggesting that King would instruct anyone to pick up guns or launch bombs. I'm not suggesting that he would tell folks to engage in violent hand-to-hand combat. I don't believe he would ever veer from his commitment to nonviolence. But I do believe that King would support at least one war, as he encouraged us during his last visit to Durham to remain awake during the Great Revolution. It's what I call the woke war. What does it mean to be woke? By historical definition, woke is the past tense of wake. Woke is the Black synonym for the word awake and has been around since the early 1900s and used to refer to the awareness of social and political issues affecting African Americans, as in to stay woke. It means to be informed, educated, and conscious of social injustice and racial inequity. Many trace its prominence in the Black vernacular to the song in 1938 by the acclaimed folk and blues musician Leadbelly, referencing the Scottsboro Boys, 9 teenagers falsely accused of raping 2 white women aboard a train in Alabama in 1931, with 8 of them originally sentenced to death from an all-white jury, with one as young as 12 years old. Lead Belly instructed his listeners to best stay woke. In other words, to be aware of potential for racist violence and legal injustice in the South. But even before Lead Belly, young supporters of Abraham Lincoln in the 1860 presidential election formed a popular national movement called the Wide Awakes, campaigning for workers' rights and the abolition of slavery. A decade ago, around 2014, woke found a resurgence after the killing of Michael Brown, as death after death of black unarmed citizens from police brutality and injustice rose, most prominently used as part of the Black Lives Matters movement. But this is exactly what King told us to do, to remain awake, to stay woke. Yet somehow we allowed that term to be co-opted and turned into something negative, to be woke, or what is termed as wokeism. Yet oddly enough, even by those who try to disparage it, they define it accurately. They describe it as an umbrella term for progressive values. By their own admission, they have said that woke is the belief that there are systematic injustices in American society and the need to address them. However, they follow this with the statement that we reject woke ideology, saying we would never ever surrender to the woke agenda. I don't know about you, but woke sounded like exactly what I aim to be. As a result of this anti-woke movement, we see the rejection of education based on historical facts, the overturning of curative legislation aimed at equity, and most recently, backtracking of corporate policies concerning diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility of people inclusive of lenses such as race, gender, and sexual orientation. It's become a dog whistle or rallying cry for racism, sexism, and any other ism you can imagine, and a justification for overt and public discrimination, oppression, and suppression. In 2025, what we see now is an attempt to restrict the education of all children. Removing books about slavery or great black achievement doesn't erase it from history. They want black kids and white kids and everyone in between to think that the struggles that blacks face as a people are from a natural inferiority and that the achievements of the white race are based on a natural superiority. They want to defund our school districts. They want to bankrupt our HBCUs. They want to make it legal to discriminate against us in jobs and every other avenue of upward mobility. But the truth is that the world and daily news are our classrooms right now. Take advantage of them. We're seeing lessons right now that have only previously appeared in books or under dictatorships in foreign countries. Many of our kids know nothing of a world where all of their rights are trying to be stripped away. It is our job to teach them why it is important, and more important, to protect democracy and the right to vote than to protect TikTok. Our kids are watching. They're watching to see what we will do. Are we going to sit in the corner and cower, or are we going to raise our voices and bodies to action? That's why fighting for places like Heritage Square is so critical right now. Do any of you remember the final scene from the play and movie A Raisin in the Sun, when brother Walter Lee, played by Cynthia Portier, was about to accept a bribe from the white community to not move into their neighborhood? Walter Lee is going to sell the house that the family just brought to his would-be neighbors to avoid confrontation with the neighborhood's white residents who do not want them there. And he wants to send his young son, Travis, out to play while he makes the deal and takes the check. But Big Mama, the matriarch of the family, says, no, let him stay. She says, let him watch. She says, make him see. She says, make him understand. She says, Travis, you stay right here and you make him understand what you're doing, Walter Lee. Our kids are watching us now. If we don't show them that we will fight, if we don't show them that they are worth fighting for, that their heritage is worth fighting for, they won't understand. They won't understand if we are in a corner for the next 4 years, hiding or sleeping while waiting for the nightmare to end. They won't understand if we don't fight for the future of Hayti and Heritage Square. You win some and you lose some, but at least you fight. So if my first plea is for you to teach for wherever you are during these historic times, then my second plea is to stay awake and make sure your kids are awake too. Stay woke. Because of this, the only way to win this fight is through the woke war. Think of the woke war like the Cold War. No bombs have to be launched, no guns have to be drawn, no geographic invasion has to take place. However, intentional action is imperative. It is a battle of the ideas expressed through how we make decisions, who we engage with, how we hire and build teams, who gets access to educational and professional opportunity, and most importantly, where we decide to spend our money. Science, technology, arts, humanities, culture, markets, and policy will all be used as our tools of this war. Most importantly, truth must remain our greatest weapon, and we must battle to the end. We're not going back. I want a world where difference is appreciated and celebrated, not feared and mocked. In his Remaining Awake speech, King spoke of making America great, decades before anyone else co-opted this sentiment as a veiled slogan of subjugation. He asked God for the strength to be David's of truth against the Goliath of injustice and neglect, and to go on with the determination to make America the truly great America that it is called to be. He said that ultimately a great nation is a compassionate nation, but he also said, I submit that nothing will be done until people of goodwill will put their bodies and their souls in motion. He said, it will be the kind of soul force brought into being as a result of this confrontation that I believe will make the difference. So I believe King would approve of this war, the woke war, because to be woke is to be aware and alert. And like King told those student leaders at the Durham strategy session in 1960, if business leaders won't listen to reason by giving everyone a place at the counter, at the table, in the boardroom, along the supply chain, then your dollar doesn't deserve a place in their bank accounts. We must remain awake. We must remain awake and drive this revolution. We must win the woke war. I'm proud to be called woke. In what other environment is being woke a bad thing? If you're asleep at your desk at work or on a Zoom or Teams meeting, is that a good thing? Is being asleep on a dinner date a good thing? Is being asleep driving a car a good thing? Some folks in corporate America might say that self-driving cars will solve all of that, but we're not there yet. If I was standing up here at this pulpit asleep, would that be a good thing? Then why should we accept sleeping in our politics and in our society? So moving to conclude his speech, King said, let me close by saying that we have difficult days ahead in the struggle for justice and peace, but I will not yield to a politic of despair. He said, I'm going to maintain hope. He spoke of confronting Washington while admitting that the cards are stacked against us. In other words, as hard as it might have been in the recent months, now is not the time to retreat. Time is not neutral. I don't believe that it was a coincidence that King's last speech in Durham was to tell us to remain awake through a great revolution, because Durham was the place that he came to talk strategy. Durham must step up now and lead this revolution. We can't sleep through it. It must start with each of us. People around the world know of the world-class institutions that make up Durham and our unique history of equity leadership. We must draw on that history now. Don't let anyone force us into some hibernation. Think globally, act locally. Let's start with Heritage Square, but let's not stop there. I have to admit, though, I've admired King for as long as I can remember, but it was only recently that I've been able to appreciate just how truly courageous he was. Really courageous. How courageous the Michaux, the McKissicks, the Chisholms, the Fannie Lou Hamers, and the countless ordinary people. When on a daily basis I see people and institutions with billions of dollars and endless resources shrink and hide from those currently in power. Learning from our ancestors, you truly understand what it means to speak truth to power in a courageous way. King was scheduled to come to Durham once more 4 years after his Remaining Awake speech at NCCU, but it would not be. Dr. King was originally scheduled to be in both Wilmington and Durham on April 4th, 1968. However, he felt compelled at the last minute to be somewhere else, where he wouldn't be talking about strategy, but actually implementing it. He changed his travel plans for April 8th from Durham to Memphis for the Sanitation Worker March. April 4th is the day that King would ultimately be assassinated while in Memphis. And we always ask the question of what would MLK say if he were alive today, or what would he do in a particular situation? Well, my answer is that I don't know. I hope that at age 96, he will be sitting somewhere relaxing and resting, and that we wouldn't have to call him every time we need saving or an answer. The greatest tribute that we can pay to Martin Luther King is to be the solutions to our own challenges. After his death, one of his leading pupils from the movement, Diane Nash, said, if people think that it was Martin Luther King's movement, then today they, young people, are more likely to say, gosh, I wish we had a Martin Luther King here today to lead us. If people knew how that movement started, then the question they would ask themselves is, what can I do? I'm here to tell you that what you can do here in St. Mark AME Zion Church, in Durham, in any place that is watching this or hearing these words, is to stay woke and enlist in the woke war. So what is the call to action? There are a few things. First, this request for rezoning will go before the Planning Commission on next Tuesday, April 8th. Please support April 8th pushback at the Planning Commission and attend virtually or in person and submit comments online before April 8th. Second, let your councilman or councilwoman know wherever you live at in Durham that you stand with the historic Hayti community and you want them to stand with the community as well when it comes to rezoning, no to rezoning. 3, we asked Sterling Bay to delay their planning request to have substantive talks with the community. They said no. So we'll be asking the Planning Commission to postpone a decision for 90 days so the community can try to get Sterling Bay into a real conversation. 4th, ask the city council to fulfill the promise that they made to the community less than a year ago when they instituted the Hayti Promise. Ask them not to break another promise to this community. Honor the promissory note. And 5th, most importantly, your charge when you leave here is to stay woke. King left us with plenty of ammunition for this war, his words from his final visit and his final speech in Durham. He reminded those gathered on that late night at North Carolina Central University that if we remain awake, standing up against evil in our societies, struggling in every creative movement to get rid of the evils that cloud our days, then we will see the brighter day. Then we will see that new America. I have faith in that new day. I believe it is coming. So I want to return to the initial question. If a black church in Alabama on a Friday night in 1955 can launch a global movement, what can be launched from a black church on a Friday night in Durham, North Carolina in 2025? In the weeks ahead, here in Durham, we want folks to know that we won't allow our history to be erased. We will show that Durham is not asleep. So we're launching a Wide Awake Super PAC that will ensure that we have candidates and leaders from the local to the national who are also wide awake. So what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? No, not if you stay woke. Hayti can be reborn. Hayti can rise again. In this season of resurrection, remember to keep the faith. Our ancestors did. Just outside of these doors, you will see more than a highway that tried to tear apart a community. You will see a community that has survived for 160 years. You will see in Hayti Square our inheritance, the dreams of our ancestors. You will see the historic Fayetteville Street corridor. What does that mean? It means that we are well on our way to Greenville. Stay awake on the way to Greenville. As Dr. King let us know, just because you're dreaming doesn't mean that you're sleeping. Stay woke. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. Before you go, let us pause now for a closing prayer. Lord, as we prepare to go, come go with us and help us. Help us to hear, help us to see, help us to speak, help us to remember, help us to be furious, help us to love, help us to care. Help us to be like King. Help us to do mercy. Help us to love justice. Help us to dream but stay awoke. And help us to go tell somebody, to go tell everybody, no rezoning in Hayti. God go with us, I pray. Amen.
Everybody, you have your programs. Please take them with you. Dr. McCoy gave you the what's next, the next steps, and the links and the order are on the back of your program. The most important thing, keeping first things first, is to make your voice heard by submitting a formal statement about your desire about the rezoning in Hayti, and the link is on the back. So as we all stand to prepare for departure, let us join in singing that most familiar and most inspiring hymn, We Shall Overcome.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome.
Thank you, Durham. Thank you, St. Mark. Thank you for joining in this experience with us. Thank you for staying awake this evening. Now that we're woke, let's take action.